There was a time when photography didn't mean a camera, it meant Kodak. And here's the shocker, Kodak engineers built a digital camera prototype inside Kodak decades early, and then treated the idea like a threat. That sounds impossible. Because if you invent the future first, you're supposed to own it. But Kodak didn't lose because it didn't see digital coming. Kodak lost because digital wasn't just a new product. It was a future where people still take photos, maybe more photos than ever. But the money meter Kodak depended on goes quiet. And once you understand Kodak's money meter, you'll understand why the future felt less like opportunity and more like self-destruction. By the 1980s and 1990s, Kodak wasn't just a photography brand. In the US market especially, it was often cited as controlling the vast majority of film sales. Many estimates get thrown around in the 80–90% range at different points. And that one fact matters because it tells you what Kodak felt like to the world, not a company you could compete with, but a law of nature. Walk into a supermarket or drugstore in America in the 90s and you'd see it everywhere. Yellow Kodak racks near the counter, disposable cameras hanging like candy, and right beside them, the quiet profit engine most people never think about. The photo counter, the developing envelopes, the prints you'd pick up days later. Kodak wasn't selling cameras. Kodak was selling a ritual, and rituals are hard to replace. You'd shoot the memories, finish the roll, drop it off, come back for developing, pick up prints, buy another roll, repeat. That loop didn't just create revenue, it created habit. And habit doesn't need convincing. Habit feels permanent. Here's the warning most giants miss. This is the part of the story where empires sign their own death certificate without realizing it. Because Kodak's empire wasn't the device in your hand. It was everything you had to buy after the photo. Film rolls, chemical processing, photo paper, labs, retail partnerships. The entire pipeline that turned human behavior into repeat profit. At its peak, Kodak wasn't some small nostalgic brand. It was an American business giant. Tens of billions in revenue across its ecosystem, a massive global workforce, and a cultural presence so strong its name became part of language. This is a Kodak moment. And when a company becomes culture, something dangerous happens. It starts confusing today's habit with tomorrow's certainty. Because ecosystems are hard to kill until someone removes one step and the whole machine collapses. And Kodak had already seen what that missing step would look like years earlier. So now rewind to 1975, because this is where the story stops being. Kodak got disrupted and turns into something almost uncomfortable. Kodak touched the future first, not as a rumor, not as a prediction, as a working device. And here's the question that should tighten your chest. What do you do when the future shows up early and it threatens the thing that makes you rich today? Inside Kodak, engineer Steve Sasson hunched over a cluttered lab bench, surrounded by wires, circuit boards, and a stack of cassette tapes. He'd been asked to do something unusual, build a camera that didn't rely on film. If you're expecting something sleek, don't. This thing was clunky, heavy, and looked more like a science project than a product, often described as roughly toaster-sized and around 8 pounds. The prototype used an early image sensor. It captured a tiny black and white image commonly cited as 100 to 100 pixels. And in widely reported retellings, it took about 23 seconds to record a single photo. Onto a cassette tape. A cassette tape. Let that sink in. The digital camera wasn't an iPhone moment. It was slow, awkward, and unimpressive. And that's exactly why this moment matters, because disruption rarely arrives as a finished masterpiece. It arrives as proof of direction. Sasson pressed the shutter. The machine whirred and clicked, and it produced something simple, grainy, almost laughable by modern standards. A photo captured without film. That was the terrifying part, not the quality, the implication. Because if one engineer can do this in 1975, the only question is time. Sensors get better, storage gets smaller, speed increases, costs drop. The prototype is ugly, but the curve is beautiful, and the curve always wins. Not long after, Sasson carried the prototype into a meeting room with Kodak managers. He connected it to a TV and pressed play. The image appeared, blocky, monochrome, but undeniably a photograph. The room went quiet. And then came the sentence that explains Kodak's entire tragedy. Interesting, but what would it do to film? Because to Kodak, digital wasn't a new camera. Digital was a future where the behavior stays and the money disappears. People still take photos. They just stop buying film, stop paying for developing, stop feeding the photo counter ritual. And when your empire is built on that ritual, a filmless camera isn't exciting. It's a warning sign with your name on it. This is the part where most people say, okay, Kodak invented it. Kodak should have owned digital photography. But inventing the future is easy compared to betting your entire business on it. Inside big companies, the first reaction to a disruptive invention often isn't celebration, it's triage. What does this do to our margins? What does this do to the system that funds everything? Because Kodak's real business wasn't a camera company. It was a meter that paid repeatedly. If you were a Kodak executive, you didn't need a speech. You needed a spreadsheet. One family vacation could mean multiple rolls of film, then developing fees, then prints, then duplicate prints, then reprints. Money stacked on money. Digital turns that same vacation into a one-time device purchase, and then silence. No film refills, no processing envelopes, no guaranteed return trip to the counter, no default print order. And when a company is used to getting paid every time people use the product, a future where people use the product without paying you again doesn't feel like innovation. It feels like losing control. Here's the second trap. Disruption usually looks worse at the beginning. In 1975, digital was clunky, storage was awkward, the image was tiny, the demand wasn't screaming yet. Meanwhile, film was still improving, and film was still printing billions. So not yet could sound like wisdom. It could sound like discipline. It could sound like protecting shareholders. But here's the line that turns the knife. The same logic that protects your profits today can destroy your position tomorrow. And Kodak had even more gravity than most companies because Kodak wasn't just a brand. It was an industrial ecosystem. Coating and chemicals, paper, labs, retail partnerships, one-hour photo counters, supply chains designed for physical consumables. That infrastructure wasn't just expensive.
No film.
It was powerful
Incredible.
inside the company.
How's the quality?
The divisions tied to film economics had the loudest voice.
Amazing.
Because they
Okay,
funded the
everyone
empire.
smile.
So Kodak
Say
did what
cheese,
fat giants
kids.
often do.
Oh,
It
we're
explored
perfect.
digital,
You're
but
also
tried to do it in ways
photogenic.
that didn't murder
Got
the
it.
film machine. Digital, but controlled. Digital, but delayed. Digital, but pulled back toward printing. Because Kodak's comfort wasn't, we'll never do digital. Kodak's comfort was, we'll do digital in a way that keeps the old cash engine alive. And that's how we'll do it later, when it's proven, becomes the most expensive sentence in corporate
Digital
history.
quality rises
Because
over
later
time,
isn't
while
neutral.
film dominance
Later gives
falls.
competitors time
This
to
graph
learn.
visualizes
Later
the
gives
shift in
consumers
production
time to build a new
standards.
habit.
This is
Later
the
gives the
Mavica.
market time
No
to write
film.
new rules you didn't
Incredible.
write.
How's the
And while
quality?
Kodak is
It's
balancing
magnetic.
internal
50
politics,
images per
the
disc.
outside world is
Amazing.
compounding.
Okay, everyone
Here's where
smile.
the story stops
Say
feeling
cheese,
like an
kids.
internal Kodak debate
Oh, we're
and starts
perfect.
feeling like
You're
a
also
race. Kodak
photogenic.
didn't realize
Got
it was
it.
running. Because while Kodak kept digital close enough to study, but far enough to protect film, the outside world kept moving, year by year, product by product, habit by habit, and disruption still looks small at first. That's why it's dangerous. Lock onto a simple timeline spine, and you'll feel the acceleration.
Digital
1981,
quality
Sony
rises
chose
over
Mavic,
time, while
more
film
electronic
dominance
still video
falls.
than modern digital,
This graph
but a clear
visualizes the
signal
shift
player
in
that
production
filmers capture
standards.
Isn't fantasy
This is the
anymore.
Mavica.
Early
No
1990s, Kodak's
Incredible.
name
How's the
appears in
quality?
professional digital
It's
systems,
magnetic.
often
50 images per
associated with the
disc.
Kodak
Amazing.
DCS.
Okay, everyone
Expensive,
smile.
niche,
Say
professional.
cheese, kids.
That nuance matters.
Oh, we're
Kodak
perfect.
wasn't a
You're
slit.
also
Kodak was
photogenic.
split.
Got
They could
it.
build digital, but mass adoption wasn't the battlefield yet. The battlefield was the moment digital became normal for everyone. And the winner of that moment wouldn't be decided by who invented first. It would be decided by what improves fastest. Storage gets cheaper, resolution climbs, screens become usable, batteries last longer.
Digital
Uploading goes
quality
from
rises
annoying
over
to
time,
easy.
while film
Kodak
dominance
couldn't control
falls.
most of the curves
This
that
graph
mattered at consumer
visualizes
scale.
the shift in
Memory
production
pricing,
standards.
sensor manufacturing
This is the
scale across
Mavica.
the industry,
No film.
display ecosystems,
Incredible. How's the
batteries,
quality?
software.
It's
Those were
magnetic.
driven by a
50 images
global
per
electronics
disc.
machine
Amazing.
that accelerated
Okay,
whether
everyone
Kodak
smile.
approved or not.
Say
Now
cheese,
picture a
kids.
Kodak reaction
Oh,
model.
we're
A
perfect.
competitor
You're
that
also
lands on the table.
photogenic.
A new
Got
digital
it.
model gets passed around. And the room has that quiet tension where nobody wants to say the obvious sentence out loud. This isn't perfect, but it's getting better fast. And the worst part is this. Digital doesn't need to beat film on quality immediately. Not at first. It only needs to remove pain. Instant preview. Delete mistakes. Take hundreds
Digital
of shots
quality
without
rises
buying
over
anything
time,
extra.
while film
No
dominance
running out of
falls.
film mid-event.
This graph
No pain to
visualizes the
develop
shift in
bad
production
shots.
standards.
People feel that
This is the
upgrade
Mavica.
immediately.
No film.
And pain removal
Incredible.
spreads
How's the
faster than
quality?
quality improvement
It's magnetic.
because it
50
changes
images per
behavior on
disc.
day one.
Amazing.
Okay, everyone
1999,
smile.
Nikon's D1
Say
becomes
cheese,
one of those
kids.
pro-market
Oh,
signals
we're
that digital is
perfect.
no
You're
longer
also
employed.
photogenic.
Then the early
Got it.
2000s hit. Point and shoot digitals flood shelves, and suddenly people stop rationing photos. They shoot more because they can. They experiment because mistakes are free. Photography shifts from scarce and careful to abundant and casual. And abundance changes what people value. Film's discipline limited shots, delayed feedback,
Digital quality
starts
rises
feeling
over
less like
time,
nostalgia
while film
and more like
dominance
friction.
falls.
Then the internet
This graph
kicks the door
visualizes
open,
the shift in
because
production
once photos live on
standards.
screens,
This
the
is the
default
Mavica,
output is no
no
longer
film.
paper.
Incredible.
Photos
How's
become
the
something
quality?
you email,
It's magnetic,
upload to
50
web
images
galleries,
per disc.
and keep in
Amazing.
online albums.
Okay, everyone smile.
Mid-2000s,
Say cheese,
Flickr becomes a
kids!
visible symbol
Oh,
of that
we're
behavior.
perfect. You're
Photography
also
is a digital
photogenic.
library and a
Got
feed,
it.
not a print pickup. Kodak's old world was take photo, develop al, print, keep. The new world becomes take photo, file
This
view,
is the Mavica,
share,
no
file
film.
view, share,
Incredible.
file,
How's the
store
quality?
digitally.
It's
And
magnetic,
Kodak's
50
pipeline
images per
breaks at the
disc.
center.
Amazing.
So Kodak's instinct is understandable. If the world is going digital, printing becomes the last stronghold where Kodak still has gravity. So you get bridge strategies, kiosks, retail printing, home photo printing. Kodak picture maker kiosks are one example of that mindset. It isn't irrational. Printing is where the old money lived, but the new habit doesn't want extra steps. The new habit wants frictionless digital life, screens over paper, instant over delayed, share over wait. And then comes the tipping point you can't brand your way around, the camera phone.
Here's your burger,
Camera
hun.
phones appear
Thanks,
early in the
doll.
2000s, and then smartphones make the camera always on and always
Say, did you
connected.
hear about the game
camera
last
stops
night?
being an
Oh,
event,
tell
it
me
becomes
all
a
about
reflex. You don't bring a camera, you already have one. And when that becomes normal, Kodak isn't competing with film companies anymore. Kodak is competing with the electronics world, the software world, and the platform shaping attention. That's the rule change. And that's why Kodak's delay becomes brutally expensive. Because by the time Kodak pushes hard, the market isn't an empty frontier anymore, it's crowded. Margins are thinner, habits are already formed, and once digital hits good enough, adoption doesn't grow politely, it explodes. Which brings us to the phase where the habit flip becomes visible inside Kodak's economics. When does "I'll try it once" become "why would I ever go back"? In the early 2000s, you could see the behavior change with your own eyes.
Here's your burger,
People
hun.
stopped
Thanks,
rationing
doll.
shots. They stopped saving film for important moments. They start
Say, did
taking
you hear
50
about the
photos
game
at a
last
birthday
night?
instead of
Oh,
5.
tell me all about
Because
it.
mistakes are free and feedback is instant. Digital doesn't just change image quality, it changes permission. You can try, and try again. And once people get used to that, film starts feeling like a penalty. Now here's the difference between the race and the collapse. The race is about who builds better cameras. The collapse is about what happens when Kodak's money machine stops being fair. Because Kodak could sell a digital camera and still lose. That sounds impossible until you remember what Kodak's empire actually was. Not the camera sale, but the repeat money after the camera. In film, every memory had a meter running rolls, developing, prints, duplicates. In digital, that meter starts collapsing. A digital photo often produces
Here's your
zero
burger,
follow-up
hun.
revenue
Thanks,
for Kodak.
doll.
No film roll, no processing envelope, no guaranteed
Say,
counter
did you
visit,
hear about
no
the game
default
last
print
night?
order.
Oh,
Here's a
tell me
mini
all
scene that
about
makes
it.
it real. Picture a Walgreens or Walmart photo counter that used to feel like a constant line yellow envelopes, weekend drop-offs, print pickups, now quieter, not empty yet, but different. The envelope rack is still there, the machines are still humming, but the line that used to wrap around the aisle is gone. Fewer envelopes, fewer returns. Because the new habit is sitting at home, scrolling on screen. This is where Kodak's strategy becomes understandable but tragic. Kodak tries to rebuild gravity after the photo, printing bridges, kiosks, home photo printers, services that keep Kodak in the loop. Because printing is the last place the old economics still make sense, and Kodak did make real moves in digital, EasyShare becomes a serious consumer push. Kodak
Here's your
acquires
burger,
a photo
hun.
in
Thanks,
2001
doll.
and pushes into online sharing, later evolving that effort into
Say, did you
Kodak's
hear
gallery
about the game
ambitions.
last night?
These
Oh,
aren't
tell me
sleeping
all
moves.
about it.
These are "we're trying to survive the flip" moves. But the twist is brutal. The market's new habit wasn't take digital photos and print them like film. The new habit was take photos, keep them on screens, send them instantly. So printing becomes an optional extra, not the center of the experience. Meanwhile, the economics of the new world get harsher every year. Digital hardware commoditizes. Features become standard fast. Every year, cameras get cheaper and better. Great for consumers, brutal for late-moving companies, because profits get squeezed. And that's the cruel setup. Once habits flip, the old cash engine doesn't decline politely, it drains. And Kodak is forced to push harder into digital precisely when digital becomes a knife fight. So what do you do when you finally accept the future and realize the future isn't paying like the past did? What do you do when the old cash engine is draining, but the new market is a knife fight, thinner margins, faster cycles? And when
Let's
you
see how
arrive
this
late,
one
you don't
turns
just
out.
compete, you compete on someone else's terms.
Daddy, it's
That's where Kodak's late pivot
beautiful.
becomes heartbreaking,
The
because
colors
this
are
is the phase where
perfect.
Kodak starts doing many things that sound right, while still being trapped by timing. Step 1 is the simplest truth. Once the film and processing meter weakens, your choices shrink. You stop making bold moves from strength. You start making survival moves from pressure. Step 2 is the irony beat that should feel impossible. Kodak is often cited as briefly becoming A1 in US digital camera sales in the mid-2000s, a headline that sounds like victory, yet profits didn't follow the way the film era trained Kodak to expect. Here's the mechanism in one clean line. In film, Kodak got paid per photo. In digital, Kodak got paid per device, while competitors forced that device price down every year. Even when unit sales look great, a low-margin camera sale can't replace decades of high-margin film and processing. Now picture the shelf reality as a micro scene. Kodak cameras under bright retail lights next to a wall of competitors. Spec cards everywhere, instant rebates, last year's models discounted. A sales associate casually points to the cheaper option with basically the same features. The retailer doesn't care who invented the future. The retailer cares what sells fastest this quarter. That's the new game. Step 3 is Kodak's deliberate, understandable bet to rebuild a recurring meter, printing. Around 2007, Kodak pushes hard into consumer inkjet printers, pitching low-cost ink and trying to turn ink into the new refill. Replace the film roll with an ink cartridge. Recreate recurring revenue after the device sale. It's a smart instinct on paper. It's consistent with Kodak's DNA, but it's also brutal because printers were already a competitive category with strong incumbents. And beyond competition, there's the deeper habit problem. In the new world, printing isn't the center of the experience. Step 4 is the earnings call reality. Imagine a slide where revenue can look okay in places, devices shipped, products moving, while profit doesn't because the legacy engine is fading and the new engine is lower margin and hyper-competitive. Imagine an analyst asking a question nobody wants to answer clearly. Where does recurring revenue come from now? That's what collapses companies, not a lack of effort, a lack of a profitable loop. Step 5 is the ecosystem shift becoming unavoidable. Photography stops being a camera purchase and becomes a feature inside devices people already buy. The gatekeepers become smartphone ecosystems and the software layer. Think Apple and Google shaping the always-on camera world, social platforms shaping sharing behavior, and cloud services shaping storage defaults. This is where the profit becomes concrete. It moved into smartphones, operating systems, app ecosystems, social distribution, and cloud storage. Kodak isn't competing in a single product category anymore. Kodak is competing inside an ecosystem war where hardware alone doesn't control the relationship. Step 6 is the final twist. Kodak didn't fail because it never tried. It failed because the economics it needed were disappearing faster than it could rebuild a new meter, and because the new battlefield punished late movers with squeezed margins and crowded shelves. Kodak could win attention and still lose economics. And once you're in that position, legacy costs still heavy, new markets lower margin, ecosystems setting the rules, time becomes oxygen. Every year you spend adjusting is a year competitors spend compounding, which brings us to the moment the story becomes official. January 2012. Kodak files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. That single headline is the moment the slow decline becomes official. And the question isn't, how did a camera company fail? The question is, how does a company that once owned photography end up here? Because by this point, the story isn't about talent or invention anymore. It's about a loop that stopped paying. Film and processing, the old meter, kept weakening as habits moved to screens. Digital and printing, the attempted replacement meters,
Breakdown chart, assets sold, divisions cut, workforce reduced.
Kodak can show progress in future-facing areas and still look worse where it matters most. Profit and cash flow because the legacy engine was fading faster than any new loop could replace it. Now make collapse feel real with receipts, not vibes. This is when you see the last levers being pulled, assets sold to raise cash, divisions cut, businesses exited, footprints shrinking, workforce reductions and restructures, creditors tightening the room. The company isn't planning the next era anymore, it's buying time. And here's the micro scene that makes it visceral. Imagine walking into work and seeing the headline
Breakdown chart, assets sold, divisions cut, workforce reduced.
The brand is still everywhere in people's memories, but the machine behind it is now being reorganized in public, under legal protection because the old structure can't survive the new world. This is the countdown phase of collapse. Sell what you can, cut what you must, protect what still generates cash, negotiate with creditors, and try to rebuild around what's left. And what makes Kodak's collapse sting isn't only the filing, it's the irony that the company saw the direction first. It had the early proof. It had the warning. Yet the economics never returned to what film once generated because the market changed.
Breakdown
what it
chart.
rewards.
Assets sold.
Smartphones made the
Divisions
camera
cut.
ubiquitous,
Workforce
sharing made
reduced.
printing optional. Platforms owned the relationship. The loop broke at multiple points at once. And once that happens, legacy power doesn't save you, only a new profitable loop does. And hovering over all of this, like a ghost you can't ignore, is that earlier moment, 1975, the future on a lab bench, the first proof that photography could exist without film. Because Kodak didn't collapse because it lacked innovation. Kodak collapsed because it couldn't fully embrace an innovation that threatened what it already was, until the market forced the change on Kodak's behalf. And once the market makes the decision, you're not choosing the future anymore, you're negotiating your exit. And negotiating your exit is always more expensive than building a future. Kodak's collapse wasn't a mystery, it wasn't bad luck. It was a pattern documented in numbers, habits, and incentives. 1975, a digital camera prototype proves the direction. Mid-2000s, Kodak is often cited as briefly leading US digital camera sales, yet the margins and the old meter don't come back. January 2012, Chapter 11 makes the decline official. That's the whole arc, and it matters because it shows the real lesson. This story isn't about a camera. It's about a company trying to protect what worked, while the default quietly changed. Lesson 1 is the simplest and most underrated. Don't confuse demand for the behavior with demand for your business model. People didn't stop wanting memories. People took more photos than ever. What changed was the method, and the method changed the economics. Film was a meter that paid Kodak repeatedly after every memory. Digital broke that meter. Lesson 2 is timing, not yet, is expensive. In 1975, digital looked weak. Waiting sounded rational. But not yet is how competitors get time to compound and how habits get built without you. Lesson 3 is where the money moved. The power moved toward phones, software, platforms, and storage, toward the companies that owned the always-on camera habit and the distribution of attention. And when the money moves, you can't chase it with old instincts. Kodak tried to rebuild a loop through printing bridges, kiosks, home printing, services, because that was the last place the old economics still made sense. It wasn't irrational. Printing was the last place Kodak still had gravity. But once screens became the default, printing became an optional extra, not the center of the experience. Now and ever. Because this story becomes more real and more unsettling when you know what happened after. Kodak didn't vanish into thin air after bankruptcy. It emerged smaller and more focused, leaning more into business-to-business lanes like commercial printing and imaging-related work, along with licensing and intellectual property. The name didn't disappear, but the empire did. And if you still see Kodak film today, that's part of the twist. Some products and parts of the brand survived in various forms, but the old consumer dominance, the feeling that Kodak was photography, didn't. Here's the final image that makes the whole story stick. That one question in 1975, how many rolls of film does it use, was the entire story in disguise. The answer was none. And that none was both the future and the threat. So if you want a practical takeaway that isn't motivational fluff, it's this. If your best product depends on an old habit, treat that as a warning, not a moat. Build a new loop before the old loop breaks. Because once the default changes, you're no longer choosing the future, you're negotiating your exit. And the final question is the only one worth sitting with. What are you protecting today? Your routine, your income stream, your identity, your "this is how I do things" that might be quietly burying your tomorrow. That's the Kodak lesson.